Okay, welcome to episode 3 of my EoC PvP guide. Now, a brief recap of what we talked about in episode 1 and 2. In episode 1, we talked about what PvP comes down to, and that's outsmarting and manipulating your opponent. We talked about the combat triangle and a few of the pros and cons of each style. And we also talked about gear and in what situations does gear matter and in which situations does it not matter. Now, in episode 2, we talked about kind of the basic abilities and why each ability is unique. And we also talked about thresholds and kind of went into a bit of chaining them together and performing combos. Now, I will go into those a little bit more depth after I give you guys ultimate abilities and a few more basic abilities in this episode. And I'll kind of give you guys a few examples. Maybe I'll put in a few clips of me performing certain combos. But I really wanted to save the combos and how to perform them for episode 4. So in this episode, what I want to talk about is ultimate abilities and really what role do they play in a PvP fight. So really I use two main ultimate abilities, and other people use a third one. So you can see them on screen now. So first, going left to right here, first we've got Natural Instinct, Onslaught, and Death Swiftness. Now, all of these ultimate abilities require a quest or a Mazcab ability codex to unlock them. So, Natural Instinct, the first one, it requires the World Wakes quest, and on usefulness, I'd probably give it a 9 out of 10. Basically, every single fight that I have, 9 times out of 10, I will be using this ability. So what it does is, basically you siphon all of your opponent's adrenaline, and it gives it to you, and your opponent goes back down to 0 adrenaline. Now, why is this useful? A lot of times in a PvP fight, you will see people racing to 100% adrenaline in order to use Natural Instinct, in order to set up combos. So, before we kind of talk about and you guys understand how it's useful, let me explain a few different ways that you guys can prevent your opponent from performing a combo, because that's why Natural Instinct is so good, because it kind of negates a few of those things that they can do in order to stop you from performing your combos or negating its effectiveness. So, preventing a combo or kind of countering it, you've got a few different options here. You've got Debilitate, Reflect, you can Pray, you can Eat, Run. That's really a couple of the main things you can do. You can stun your opponent also. So really the only stuns that really work well, I should say, are threshold stuns. They're the only ones that stun you for a noticeable amount of time. And thresholds, 50% adrenaline. If you use Natural Instinct, they're not going to be able to perform those threshold stuns. So you take away that advantage of theirs and take away that option of preventing you from performing your combo. So Debilitate and Reflect. I'll talk a bit more about Debilitate when we go into the other useful abilities. But basically, those are also threshold abilities. So those are taken off the table because you're at 0% adrenaline. So you have the option to Pray. Now, you can Pray, but basic abilities knock. There's 3 different basic abilities that will take off your protection prayer. And frequently you will have your opponent, if you are praying and they use Natural Instinct, typically the next thing they'll do is take off your prayer. So we'll take that off the table. So now you've got outrun them or try to out-eat them. But remember, they just siphoned all your adrenaline. You're at 0, they're at roughly, we'll say 90%, because typically you'll have them draining your adrenaline at when you're near 100%. They've got thresholds. So they've got threshold stuns. So there goes your chance to run, and there goes part of your chance to eat. So really, Natural Instinct sets you up to perform combos very well, and it is an extremely effective ability. If you guys are not PKing with it, you will be at a severe disadvantage if you're fighting someone who does have it. Now, for some of you guys who are PVMers and do a lot of quests and are high level, odds are you will have Natural Instinct. But for those of you who are lower level and are just getting into PKing, haven't really played the game too long, I would highly recommend doing these quests that I tell you guys about in these videos, because they will give you a little leg up when you're going to PvP, because they are extremely useful abilities, and if you're fighting someone who doesn't have them, you will gain a very, very good advantage over them. So let's talk a bit about Onslaught, which is the second ability there. This requires you to have the Mazcab ability codex, which last one I bought was about 15.6, 15.7 mil, which is a little bit pricey, but it is an extremely useful and an extremely fun ability to use. In my opinion, this is the most fun ability to use in a PvP situation. So what does it do? It hits extremely high. It is a fucking nuke. When you drop this, you're dropping a nuke on your opponent. If you're fighting someone who knows what Onslaught does, they have 4 or 5 options. They will either run immediately, they will either pray immediately, they will either pop a shield and resonance or reflect immediately, they will debilitate you, or they'll just teleport. Those are really the only options they have, because you will not be able to tank this ability if you do not do one of those things. So what makes it such an insane ability to use? And it's also an extremely risky ability to use. So what it does is you start at 100% adrenaline. For every time you hit your opponent with this ability, you'll be deducted 25% adrenaline until you're at 0% adrenaline. But it doesn't stop there. You will continue to hit your opponent, but you won't be drained of adrenaline. You will once you hit 0, you will start being drained hit points. And it can get extremely severe, the amount of hit points that you will be drained, the longer that this ability goes on. I think the longest I've held the ability was about, I want to say 10 or 12 seconds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when using this ability, I'll show you a clip of this ability later, maybe in the next episode when I'm explaining combos and that type of stuff. You'll start being hurt for around a few hundred damage, but it'll start going up. Next, you'll be hit for 2k damage, then 4k damage, then 5k damage. The longer you hold this ability, the longer it scales. That's why I call it Onslaught Chicken. That's honestly why it is so fun. Because if you hit this ability and you hold it, and if your opponent doesn't do one of those 5 things I mentioned, one of you guys will die. That's it. One of you guys will die because you will be hitting your opponent for 3k, 4k, 4k, 5k. It is an insane ability. And honestly, that is why it is the most fun for me to use, because one of you guys will die if neither of you guys run. Now, it's another tricky ability. It's also tricky because once you use this ability, you are invested. And what I mean by that is, if you eat, the ability stops. If you drink a potion, ability stops. If you move a tile, ability stops. If you have a Phoenix necklace on, and that breaks because your hit points went too low, that stops the ability. If you do anything besides just sit there, the ability will stop. That is why it is an extremely hard ability to use. Fairly, with a lot of success, it's hard to get good at it. And I'd like to say I'm fairly good at it, but there have been situations where I failed, but mostly that's because the opponent has either ran or teleported. So next, let's talk about Death Swiftness. Now, Death Swiftness, it's a little bit weird in the fact people use it and they don't use it. Higher level PKers, higher skill level PKers, I'm saying, they use it sometimes, but they mostly, you see a lot of ultimate abilities such as Barricade, Death Swiftness, or even special attacks such as the Dark Bow special. You see those being used more often as adrenaline drainers because if your opponent's at 100% adrenaline, you're at 100% adrenaline, odds are they're going to natural instinct you. So what you do is you put on Death Swiftness or you use another ultimate ability. Another one I use is Guthix Blessing. You use that ability so your adrenaline drops down to 0. And hopefully, if you time it right, your opponent will natural instinct you at that same time and they will also drop to 0% adrenaline. But that's not the sole purpose that people use Death Swiftness. I have seen other people using it seriously as an advantage, such as putting up Death Swiftness and then using an adrenaline potion or racing back up to your threshold abilities. And I've seen some people pull out some pretty insane Tedrils and snapshots because the other opponent didn't run them out of Death Swiftness. So, how does Death Swiftness work? Basically, you create a little cloud around you. It's just a little circle. And when you stay in that circle, your ranged abilities will do increased damage. Now, also, if your opponent is in that circle also, he will be dealt, I think it's like 125, maybe 250 damage per tick that hits him. So if someone uses this ability on you, just run a little bit away and they'll either follow you out of the Death Swiftness cloud or they'll run back in and you can just wait until it stops. But it gets a little bit tricky because I've seen some pretty good PKers using this pretty effectively, but mostly as entry-level PKers, I wouldn't recommend using it because you just wasted a natural instinct or you just wasted a few thresholds. Really, as entry-level PKers, I would highly recommend not using any ultimate abilities besides natural instinct. I can tell you from personal experience, when I'm fighting another PKer, if they use an ultimate ability such as Death Swiftness, Deadshot, or whatever that other ultimate ability is that has the little Swift Shot or that has the little goblin head as the emblem. If I'm fighting someone or they have the incendiary shot, if they use that, I just get happy. I get excited because I know that this is a new PKer and they're not very good. Because the way you need to look at it when using an ultimate ability, you gotta weigh the benefits of it. You gotta weigh the pros and cons. You can either use an ultimate ability and hope that that increased power of it helps you get the kill. Or you can say, no, I'm going to save my adrenaline and I'm going to use 3 or 4 different thresholds. In my personal experience, I would recommend going with the thresholds. Now, if we're talking about an ultimate ability such as Natural Instinct, go ahead and use it because you're draining your opponent's adrenaline and you're gaining adrenaline back. But really, the only ultimate ability that I use frequently is Natural Instinct. Even Onslaught, I don't use it on every occasion. It's just special occasions when I'm fighting someone who I know does not know what it does, or I want to try to get lucky. So that's kind of my piece on ultimate abilities. What I'm going to do now is give you guys a few more basic abilities that are extremely useful in PvP situations. Okay, so I've got 7 more abilities here that I frequently use in PvP and that I would recommend to you. So first we've got Surge. Now Surge is a magic ability, and what it does is basically you surge forward, I think it's 8 tiles, and really what I use this for is either running away, outrunning, or chasing someone. Now, it's pretty useful in the fact that you can immediately surge 8 tiles away from your opponent. So it's also shared with Escape, which is a range ability which basically looks the same as this. It's a guy, but instead of going forward, he's going backwards. Now, I'd recommend using Surge if you're using an ability bar and you want one of these abilities on your ability bar. I'd recommend Surge because you have the option of chasing. When you're chasing someone, you're going to want to surge ahead. But also if you're running away, if you're going to quickly try to outrun an ability, it's fairly simple to just click a tile behind you so your character turns around and then surge. Really, Escape, its main purpose is outrunning an ability such as Snipe or something like that, but Surge is a lot more useful. It's got more uses because... Sorry about that, my phone went off. It's got a lot. It just has a lot more uses in the fact that you can chase and outrun opponents. Now, the next one is on the top. It's Siphon. So we're going to the top left of the 6 blocks. So Siphon, what it does is you drain a small amount of your opponent's adrenaline. So once again, if we're talking about an ability like Natural Instinct, and you have 2 people racing towards 100% adrenaline, if you're fighting a good PKer, sometimes he will let you get to 100% first, and then he will quickly use Siphon. He'll siphon a small amount of your adrenaline, and then with that siphon, odds are he's going to be at 100% adrenaline, so then he can Natural Instinct you first. It's also useful if you've just been Natural Instinct and you're down at 0% adrenaline. You can quickly siphon your opponent. It's also another one of those combo stoppers. So say your opponent is at we'll say 65% adrenaline. They're going to use 2 ultimate abilities. Threshold abilities. Let's say you're fighting a mage and he's going to use Wild Magic and then Asphyxiate. He uses Wild Magic. If you siphon him, he's not going to be able to use Asphyxiate because his adrenaline is now below 50%. So Siphon is extremely useful once you learn how to use it properly. Now below Siphon, we have Resonance. Resonance is a defensive ability that requires you to have a shield to use. Basically, what Resonance does is you'll put up a shield and then use Resonance, and the next hit that occurs to you will heal you instead of hurt you. So in what situation can this be useful? Say you're fighting a person using range. They use Shadow Tendril. You start seeing them being hit by themselves, so you're like, okay, they're going to Shadow Tendril. You got to be quick about this. You quickly pop up your shield and then use Resonance. Now instead of being hit for the 6k, 5k, 6k, you're healed 5 or 6k. That is another anti-combo ability that you have in your arsenal. But you got to be really quick at seeing what abilities, and you got to know what abilities they are using. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so out of all these abilities, these next 2 abilities are probably going to be the ones that you use the most and are the most useful to you guys as entry-level PKers. They are the 2 middle abilities there. They are Anticipate, which is on the top, and Freedom, which is on the bottom. Now, what Anticipate does and why it's useful is it will grant you immunity from stuns in a small bit. I'm talking about, it's not even like mentionable, but it'll decrease the damage to you just by a bit. But mainly what you use it for is immunity from stuns. I believe it is 10 or 15 seconds. I can't remember which. But for those 10 or 15 seconds, you cannot be stunned. So, once again, we're talking about anti-combo abilities here. They can't stun you now. So, if they're relying on a combo that requires you to be stunned so you can't eat, that takes away that part of their combo. So now you have a better chance of eating through that combo or running away. The next one kind of goes hand in hand with this ability. It is Freedom. Basically, it will free you from stuns or binds, and it will give you immunity from stuns or binds for 5 seconds. So your opponent's starting a combo. He stuns you. Now you can't eat, but you use Freedom. Now you can eat again. Now you can outrun his combo. These two abilities are, without doubt, the two most useful, I'd say the two most useful basic abilities that you have in your arsenal as entry-level PKers. They will help you because the greatest downfall of an entry-level PKer is not knowing to anticipate or Freedom at the right moment. I can't tell you how many people I've killed because they've either wasted their Anticipate or Freedom, or they just don't know about it. They don't use it. If you guys use these two abilities, you will have a much better chance of surviving and killing your opponent. So the next ability we're going to talk about is Debilitate. This is another extremely, extremely useful anti-combo ability. It's in the top right-hand corner. It looks like a skeleton of an animal. So what it does is you hit your opponent. It's a threshold, costs 15% adrenaline, requires you to have 50. You will hit your opponent, and for the next da-da-da seconds, your opponent will have decreased damage to you. So your opponent starts a Shadow Tendril or starts to use Bombardment. If you're quick enough, you can hit your opponent with Debilitate, and you'll negate a small amount of that damage that they were going to do to you. It is extremely useful just using it throughout the fight for survivability, for you to be able to outlast your opponent. And all in all, it's just a useful ability. It's a fantastic ability for entry-level PKers to use. Once again, it's one of those abilities that they don't use when they should be using it. Not many people as entry-level PKers, and really this is why I'm making these videos, their biggest downfall is using the wrong abilities and not knowing certain abilities even exist and even are useful in PvP situations. So the next ability below Debilitate is another ability that requires you to have a shield. So Resonance, and this is Reflect. So all the other abilities in this don't require anything special besides Debilitate, which is a threshold. So Reflect requires you to have a shield along with Resonance. What Reflect does is exactly what its name says. It will reflect a small amount of about 50%, I think, of the incoming damage back to your opponent. Once again, anti-combo ability. Say your opponent is a melee style opponent and he uses Berserk. He's now going to be dealing a shit ton more damage to you. What you can do is Reflect. Now a shit ton of that damage that he's doing to you is now being reflected back to himself. Now he's either got to eat or he's going to die. So that kind of breaks up his combo there. So along Onslaught. I'm using Onslaught. If they reflect, I'm immediately eating. I'm breaking off the ability because I'm not going to kill myself on their reflect. It is really, if you're fighting a PKer who knows what he's doing and you use reflect and he's mid combo, odds are he'll break it off, because it's not worth continuing when he could die when you're reflecting on him. Okay, I think that might do it for this video. We're getting kind of up there. We're in the 25-minute mark. But takeaway from this video, what do we want to say? Learn what each ability does. Remember, anticipate, freedom, surge, siphon. You need to learn these key basic abilities and know when to use them. Anticipate is kind of one of those abilities you can use throughout the fight. Freedom is a little bit more specific in the case as entry-level PKers, odds are you will want to save that ability until your opponent stuns you. Siphon, an ability that you can kind of use throughout the fight. Debilitate, another one you can kind of use throughout the fight, but if you save it for when they start performing a combo, that'll help you also. And ultimate abilities, really, if you're an entry-level PKer, try to stay away from ultimate abilities in the sense that you'll have a lot more of an advantage if you save that adrenaline for threshold abilities in order to try to pull out combos, and also save it for abilities such as debilitate and stuff like that. So just remember those key basic abilities that you can use throughout the fight. And next episode, I think I'll start it with showing you guys a few fights and pointing out some things that I do right and some things I do wrong, and pointing out what we talked about: setting up combos, debilitating, anticipating, and freedoming, and outrunning your opponent. So once again, thank you guys for watching. I hope you're learning something from this series, and have a great day.